Maya Rodriguez woke up at 5:30 a.m. every morning to the sound of her neighbor's baby crying through the thin apartment walls. She lived in a small studio on the fourth floor of an old building where the elevator worked only half the time. Her mattress sat on the floor, and her only window looked out at another brick wall just 3 feet away. She rolled out of bed and walked to her tiny kitchen, where she made instant coffee with tap water. The fancy coffee machine she'd received as a graduation gift from music school sat broken in the corner. She couldn't afford to fix it, and honestly, she'd forgotten what good coffee even tasted like. Maya looked at herself in the small mirror above her sink. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of someone who worked double shifts just to pay rent. Her hands, once soft and carefully maintained for piano playing, now had small cuts from handling dishes and glasses. She flexed her fingers, feeling the stiffness that came from carrying heavy trays instead of playing beautiful music. At 6:15 a.m., she grabbed her black work uniform from the closet. The same outfit she wore 6 days a week. Black pants, black shirt, black shoes. Everything designed to make her blend into the background, to become invisible to the people she served. The subway ride to work took 45 minutes. Maya sat in the corner, watching other passengers scroll through their phones or read newspapers. She used to bring sheet music to study during these rides, but now she just stared out the window, thinking about bills and wondering if she'd ever play piano again. The Golden Terrace restaurant sat on the top floor of one of the city's most expensive buildings. Maya had to take a special elevator just to reach it. The moment those doors opened, she stepped into a different world. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and every surface sparkled with gold accents. The dining room overlooked the city skyline, and each table probably cost more to set than Maya. Made in a week, she clocked in at 7:30 a.m. and immediately started her opening duties. Polishing silverware, folding napkins into perfect shapes, arranging flowers that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. The restaurant wouldn't open for lunch until 11 a.m., but everything had to be perfect. Maya had been working here for 3 years, and she knew the routine by heart. She could set a table in under 2 minutes, remember complex orders without writing them down, and balance 4 plates on one arm while opening a wine bottle with the other. These weren't skills she'd ever planned to learn, but life had a way of teaching you things whether you wanted to learn them or not. The other servers were nice enough, but they didn't really understand her. Most of them were college students working part-time or actors waiting for their big break. Maya was the only one with a master's degree in music, and she'd stopped mentioning it after too many awkward conversations. "Why don't you just teach piano lessons?" they'd ask, as if she hadn't thought of that. What they didn't understand was that teaching required having your own piano, your own space, and students who could afford to pay. Maya had none of those things. By 10 a.m., the morning prep was finished, and Maya took a short break in the employee area. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her old conservatory classmates' social media posts. Concert photos, recording studios, beautiful performance halls. One of her former study partners had just signed with a major record label. Another was touring Europe with a chamber orchestra. Maya quickly put her phone away. Those posts used to inspire her, but now they just made her chest tight with sadness. The lunch service began, and Maya transformed into her work persona. Smile always ready, voice always pleasant, movements always graceful. She served businessmen who made deals over expensive steaks, wealthy women who spent more on handbags than Maya made in 6 months, and young trust fund kids who treated the restaurant like their personal dining room. "Excuse me, miss," one customer called out, snapping his fingers to get her attention. Maya hurried over, her smile never wavering. "Yes, sir, how can I help you? This wine is too warm. Bring me something properly chilled." Maya looked at the wine thermometer on the table. The temperature was perfect, exactly what it should be for that particular vintage. But she nodded anyway. "Of course, sir. I'll bring you a fresh bottle right away." She returned with an identical bottle from the wine cooler, and the customer tasted it with great ceremony before nodding his approval. Maya had learned long ago that sometimes people just needed to feel important, even if it meant pretending their complaints were valid. During her afternoon break, Maya walked past the restaurant's piano. It sat in the corner of the main dining room, a beautiful black, grand piano that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Sometimes they had jazz musicians play during weekend brunches, but most days it sat silent and untouched. Maya's fingers twitched as she looked at it. She remembered the feeling of those keys under her hands, the weight of them, the way they responded to her touch. She remembered the sound of Chopin filling a concert hall, the way audiences would lean forward when she played something particularly beautiful. But that was a different life, a different person. Now she was just Maya the server, Maya the invisible woman in black who brought food and cleared plates and pretended not to hear the conversations happening around her. The dinner service was always the busiest. The Golden Terrace's evening crowd was even wealthier than the lunch customers, if that was possible. Maya served tables of 8 where the wine bill alone was more than her monthly rent. She watched them laugh and celebrate, making toasts to business deals and family milestones, completely unaware that their server had once performed for audiences of thousands. One particularly busy evening, Maya was serving a table of 6 business executives. They were discussing a major acquisition, throwing around numbers that made her head spin. As she refilled their water glasses, one of them mentioned needing entertainment for an upcoming corporate event. "We need something classy," he said. "Maybe a pianist or a small chamber group." Maya's heart jumped, but she kept her face neutral as she continued her work. For just a moment, she imagined herself at their event, playing for their guests, being appreciated for her real talent instead of her ability to carry plates. But the moment passed, and she returned to the kitchen to pick up the next order. Dreams were expensive luxuries she couldn't afford. As the night wore on, Maya's feet ached in her practical black shoes. Her shoulders burned from carrying heavy trays, and her smile felt painted on her face. But she kept going because she had to. Because rent was due next week, and her student loan payment was due the week after that, and her mother back home needed help with her medical bills. At 11 p.m., the last customer finally left. Maya helped close down the restaurant, counting her tips and hoping she'd made enough to cover her expenses. Some nights were better than others, but it was never enough to do more than survive. She caught the late subway home, surrounded by other night shift workers heading back to their small apartments and modest lives. Maya closed her eyes and let the train's rhythm rock her, trying not to think about the piano that sat silent in the restaurant, trying not to remember the music that once filled her life with purpose and joy. Back in her studio apartment, Maya heated up a cup of instant soup and sat on her bed looking at the small keyboard she'd bought at a pawn shop. It had only 61 keys and the sound was nothing like a real piano. But sometimes she'd play quietly just to keep her fingers moving. Tonight, though, she was too tired. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m. and tried to fall asleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of being invisible, another day of serving others their dreams while her own gathered dust in the corner of her heart. Maya arrived at the Golden Terrace that Friday morning to find chaos. The restaurant was buzzing with activity like she'd never seen before. Workers in coveralls were moving tables, hanging extra decorations, and setting up lighting equipment. The familiar dining room was being transformed into something that looked like a movie set. "Maya, thank goodness you're here," called out Patricia, the restaurant manager. She was a normally calm woman in her 50s who rarely showed stress, but today her hair was slightly messy and she was clutching a clipboard like her life depended on it. "What's happening?" Maya asked, tying her apron around her waist. "The annual charity gala is tonight. I told you about it last week, remember? We're hosting 200 of the city's biggest donors for the Children's Hospital Foundation." Maya vaguely remembered the conversation, but she'd been so focused on her own money problems that she hadn't paid much attention to the details. Now, looking around the restaurant, she realized this was going to be the biggest event she'd ever worked. A team of decorators was draping golden fabric along the walls, making the already fancy restaurant look even more elegant. Crystal vases filled with white roses appeared on every surface, and the lighting was being adjusted to create a warm, glamorous atmosphere. but what caught Maya's attention was the piano. A crew of 4 men was carefully positioning a massive black grand piano in the center of the dining area. It was bigger and more beautiful than the restaurant's usual piano, clearly brought in specially for tonight's event. Maya watched as they adjusted its position, making sure it was perfectly centered under the main chandelier. The piano was gorgeous. Its surface was so polished that it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. Maya could see the brand name from across the room. It was a concert-quality instrument, the kind she'd dreamed of owning back in music school. "Careful with that," Patricia called out to the movers. "That piano costs more than most people's houses." Maya couldn't help but walk closer to get a better look. The piano bench was positioned just right, and she could see the keys through the slightly open lid. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory, remembering the feel of ivory keys under her touch. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Maya turned to see Robert, the restaurant's wine expert. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes, and he'd always been nice to her. "Yes, it's incredible," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice casual. "We're having Vincent Castillo play tonight. You know, the famous pianist? He's flown in from Los Angeles just for this event. The foundation is paying him $50,000 for a 1-hour performance." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Vincent Castillo was legendary. She'd studied his recordings in music school, watched his performances online, dreamed of playing with half his skill. And tonight he'd be playing just a few feet from where she served drinks. That's amazing," she managed to say. The rest of the morning flew by in a blur of preparation. Maya helped arrange the special china and crystal glasses that were only used for the most important events. Each place setting probably cost more than her weekly salary, but she handled everything with the same careful attention she always did. Around noon, Patricia gathered all the staff in the kitchen for a briefing. "Listen up, everyone. Tonight is our biggest event of the year. These guests donate millions of dollars to charity, and they expect perfection. Every detail matters, every smile matters, every interaction matters." She looked around the room at the servers, cooks, and bartenders. The guest list includes 3 billionaires, 2 movie stars, the mayor, and about 50 people who could buy and sell this restaurant without thinking twice. They're here to support a good cause, but they're also here to be impressed. Maya felt her stomach tighten. She'd served wealthy people before, but this was different. This was the kind of wealth that made regular rich people look middle class. The evening starts at 7 with cocktails and appetizers. Vincent Castillo will perform from 8 to 9. Then we'll have dinner service, followed by the charity auction. We'll be working until at least midnight. Patricia handed out the table assignments. Maya was assigned to the VIP section, the tables closest to the piano. It was both an honor and a source of anxiety. The most important guests, the biggest tips, but also the highest expectations. As the afternoon wore on, Maya watched the final preparations. The flowers were arranged to perfection, the lighting was adjusted until it cast just the right glow, and the piano was tuned by a specialist who spent an hour making tiny adjustments. Maya found herself drawn to the piano again and again. During her break, she stood beside it, close enough to smell the wood polish and see her reflection in its perfect surface. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then gently touched one of the keys. The note rang out clear and pure in the empty restaurant. Maya quickly pulled her hand back, but the sound seemed to hang in the air like a ghost of all the music she used to make. Around 4 o'clock, the drama started. Maya was in the kitchen helping prepare the appetizer trays when she heard Patricia's voice rising in panic from the dining room. She poked her head out to see what was happening. Patricia was on her phone, pacing back and forth in front of the piano. Her face was pale, and her voice was getting higher with each word. "What do you mean he can't make it? This is Vincent Castillo. He doesn't just cancel 3 hours before a performance." Maya moved closer, pretending to adjust the flowers on a nearby table so she could hear better. "A car accident? Is he okay?" Patricia's voice cracked. "I understand, but you have to understand, we have 200 people coming here tonight. Specifically to hear him play. This is for charity." These people paid $1,000 a plate. Maya's heart sank. Even from across the room, she could hear the tinny voice from the phone delivering bad news. No, 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 there has to be something you can do. Another pianist? Anyone? Patricia ended the call and immediately started dialing another number. Maya watched her make call after call, each one more desperate than the last. The restaurant's owner arrived and joined the frantic phone calls. What about the conservatory? Surely they have students who could fill in. The jazz quartet from the hotel downtown? I don't care if they're not classical musicians. A DJ? Absolutely not. These people don't want to hear pop music at a charity gala. Maya went back to the kitchen, but she could still hear the panic in the dining room. The entire staff was starting to feel the tension. This wasn't just about music. This was about the restaurant's reputation, the charity's fundraising goals, and the expectations of some of the most powerful people in the city. By 6 o'clock, Patricia had made dozens of calls with no success. Every professional pianist in the city was either already booked, out of town, or not skilled enough to perform for such an important crowd. Maya was putting the finishing touches on the appetizer display when she overheard Patricia talking to the restaurant owner. We'll have to make an announcement. Tell them the performance has been canceled due to circumstances beyond our control. Maybe we can extend the cocktail hour, speed up the dinner service. The foundation won't be happy, the owner replied. People came here expecting a world-class musical performance. Without it, they might not bid as much at the auction. Maya's chest tightened. She knew what that piano could sound like. She knew what those keys could do in the right hands. She'd spent years learning to make music that could move people to tears, that could make them forget their troubles, that could inspire them to open their hearts and their wallets for a good cause. But she was just a server. She was invisible. She was someone who brought food and cleaned tables and smiled politely while rich people ignored her existence. The first guests would arrive in 30 minutes, and Maya had to focus on her job. She straightened her uniform, checked her appearance in the mirror, and prepared to serve the most important night of her restaurant career. But as she walked past that beautiful piano one more time, she couldn't help but think about all the music, trapped inside it, waiting for someone to set it free. The first guests arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, and Maya's world suddenly filled with diamonds, designer gowns, and conversations about private jets. She moved through the crowd with her tray of champagne, invisible as always, but tonight, she felt different. Tonight she was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every word spoken around her. The guests were everything Patricia had promised. Maya recognized faces from magazine covers and news programs. A tech billionaire who just bought a football team. A famous actress who'd won 3 Academy Awards. Politicians whose names appeared in headlines daily. They all glittered under the crystal chandeliers, their jewelry catching the light as they sipped champagne that cost more per bottle than Maya's monthly rent. "Excuse me, miss," called a woman in a silver evening gown that probably cost more than Maya's car. "Could you bring me a sparkling water with lime?" Maya smiled and nodded, weaving through the crowd to fulfill the request. As she moved between the tables, she caught fragments of conversation that revealed just how different their world was from hers. "We just bought a summer house in the Hamptons. 43 rooms, but who's counting? The yacht should be ready by next month. We're planning to spend August in the Mediterranean. I told my assistant to donate another 100,000 to the foundation. Tax write-off, you know." Maya served drinks and appetizers, her movements automatic after years of practice. But her attention kept drifting to the piano, which sat silent in the center of the room like a sleeping giant. The guests glanced at it occasionally, clearly expecting music to begin at any moment. At 7:45, Patricia took the small stage that had been set up next to the piano. She was wearing her best dress and had fixed her hair, but Maya could see the stress in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Golden Terraces annual charity gala supporting the Children's Hospital Foundation." Polite applause filled the room. Maya paused in her serving to listen, balancing a tray of empty champagne glasses. "We're thrilled to have you here tonight for this important cause. As you know, the Children's Hospital Foundation provides care for kids whose families can't afford treatment. Your generosity tonight will literally save lives. More applause. Maya watched the faces in the crowd, some genuinely moved, others just going through the motions of charity event etiquette. Before we begin dinner service, I need to make an announcement about tonight's musical entertainment. Maya's heart sank. She knew what was coming. Unfortunately, our featured performer, Vincent Castillo, was involved in a car accident this afternoon. He's going to be fine, but he's unable to perform tonight. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Maya saw several guests exchange glances, and she could almost hear their thoughts. We paid $1,000 a plate, and there's no entertainment. We sincerely apologize for this unexpected change, Patricia continued, her voice slightly shaky. We'll be moving directly to dinner service, followed by our charity auction. Patricia stepped down from the stage, and conversations resumed around the room, but Maya could tell the energy had shifted. The guests were still polite, still socializing, but there was an underlying disappointment that hung in the air like perfume. Maya continued her work, but she found herself watching the piano. More and more. It seemed to mock her with its silence. Here was an instrument that could create magic surrounded by people who appreciated fine things. And it was going to sit unused all evening. As she served the first course, a delicate appetizer that probably took the chef hours to prepare. Maya overheard a conversation at one of her tables. Such a shame about the pianist, said a distinguished man in his 70s. I was looking forward to hearing some real music tonight. Yes, agreed his companion. A woman with perfectly styled gray hair. There's something about live classical music that just elevates an evening. Makes you feel like you're truly experiencing culture. Now we'll have to listen to the usual charity auction chatter all night. The man replied with a slight grimace. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she refilled their water glasses. These people understood music. They appreciated it. They were hungry for it. And she was standing right there, invisible, carrying the ability to give them exactly what they wanted. But she was just a server. She was nobody. The dinner service continued, course after course of elegant food that Maya barely noticed. Her attention kept drifting to the piano, and she found herself remembering pieces she used to play. Chopin's nocturnes, which always made audiences lean forward in their seats. Bach's Goldberg variations, which she'd performed for her senior recital. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which had made her professor cry the first time she played it, around 9 o'clock during a brief lull in the service. Maya found herself standing near the piano again. The guests were between courses, chatting and laughing, but she could sense their restlessness. They'd come expecting an experience, and instead they were getting an expensive dinner. She looked at the piano bench, positioned perfectly under the spotlight. The keys were still visible through the slightly open lid, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Maya's fingers twitched at her sides, muscle memory activating despite her efforts to stay focused on her job. Such a beautiful instrument, said a voice behind her. Maya turned to see Robert, the wine expert, carrying a bottle of champagne. Double quotes. Yes, it is, she replied quietly. You know, I've been watching you all evening. You keep looking at that piano? Like it's calling to you. Maya's cheeks flushed. I've never seen one quite like it. Robert studied her face with kind eyes. You play, don't you? Maya hesitated. She'd kept her musical background secret for 3 years, but something about Robert's gentle manner made her want to tell the truth. I used to, she said finally, a long time ago. What did you play? Classical mostly. Some jazz. I went to music school, but she trailed off, not sure how to explain the complicated path that had led her from concert halls to serving tables. Robert nodded knowingly. Life has a way of taking us places we never expected to go. Before Maya could respond, Patricia's voice crackled over the sound system again. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our charity auction in just a few minutes. Please take your seats. Maya watched the guests settle back into their chairs, wine glasses in hand, checkbooks ready. The auction was the main event, the reason most of these people had really come. They'd bid on vacation packages, artwork, and exclusive experiences, all in the name of charity, but as she looked around the room, Maya could see that something was missing. The evening felt flat, like a beautiful painting without any vibrant colors. These people had come expecting to be moved, to be inspired, to feel something that would open their hearts along with their wallets. The piano sat silent, full of potential. That would never be realized. Maya walked to the kitchen to help prepare for the auction service, but her mind was spinning. She thought about all the music locked inside that instrument. She thought about the guests who'd expressed disappointment about the canceled performance. She thought about the children in the hospital who needed the money these wealthy people could donate, and she thought about herself, 3 years of being invisible. 3 years of suppressing the most important part of who she was. 3 years of pretending that music wasn't the language her soul spoke most fluently. As she arranged champagne glasses on her tray, Maya's hands were shaking. Not from nerves about the service, but from something deeper. Something that had been building inside her for 3 years was reaching a breaking point. She walked back into the dining room, where the auction was about to begin. The guests were seated, the auctioneer was taking the stage, and the piano remained silent and abandoned under the spotlight. Maya set down her tray and looked around the room one more time. At the wealthy guests who'd come seeking inspiration. At Patricia, who was worried about the restaurant's reputation. At the empty piano bench that seemed to be waiting for someone brave enough to fill it. For the first time in 3 years, Maya Rodriguez stopped being invisible and started being seen. Maya's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The auction had begun, and the wealthy guests were bidding on expensive vacation packages and artwork, but their enthusiasm felt forced. The energy in the room was polite but cold. Like a fancy party where everyone was going through the motions, she stood at the edge of the dining room, holding her empty tray, watching the auctioneer try to drum up excitement for a wine tasting tour in France. The bidding was slower than usual, and Maya could see Patricia wringing her hands near the kitchen door. Do I hear 15,000? 15,000 for this once-in-a-lifetime experience in the French countryside? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, someone raised their hand, but without any real enthusiasm, Maya's eyes drifted to the piano again. It sat there like a sleeping giant, the spotlight above it casting a perfect circle of light on the bench. She could almost hear the music it was capable of making, the soaring melodies, the delicate harmonies, the powerful crescendos that could make people forget about everything else in the world. The auction continued, but Maya wasn't listening anymore. Something was building inside her chest, a pressure that had been growing for 3 years. Every night of serving people who looked through her like she was furniture. Every morning of waking up in that tiny apartment knowing she was wasting her talent. Every time she'd walked past the piano and felt her heart break a little more. Next item, the auctioneer announced, is a private dinner for 12 at the Golden Terrace, personally prepared by our award-winning chef. Maya looked around the room at the faces of the guests. They were wealthy, successful, powerful people, but right now they looked bored. They'd come expecting to be moved, to be inspired, to feel something that would make them want to open their wallets wide for charity. Instead, they were getting a standard auction with standard prizes and standard speeches about tax-deductible donations. The pressure in Maya's chest was getting stronger. Her hands were shaking now, and she could feel sweat on her forehead despite the restaurant's perfect air conditioning. She looked at the piano again, and this time she didn't look away. 3 years ago, she'd been a different person. She'd been Maya Rodriguez, the pianist. Maya Rodriguez, who could make audiences cry with a simple melody. Maya Rodriguez, who had professors calling her a prodigy and predicting a brilliant future. Now she was Maya Rodriguez, the invisible server. Maya Rodriguez, who brought drinks and cleared plates and pretended not to exist, but the music was still inside her. It had never left. Maya set down her tray on a nearby table and took a step toward the piano. Then another step. Her legs felt like they were moving on their own, carrying her toward the instrument that had been calling to her all evening. A few guests noticed her walking toward the stage, but most were still focused on the auction. The auctioneer was trying to generate excitement for a golf weekend at an exclusive resort, but the bidding was lackluster. Maya reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she'd imagined. The wood was perfectly polished, and she could see her reflection in its surface. The keys were pristine, waiting for someone to bring them to life. She looked out at the crowd of wealthy guests, most of whom still hadn't noticed her. They were checking their phones, whispering to each other, looking around the room with the restless energy of people who weren't getting what they'd paid for. Maya thought about the children in the hospital who needed the money these people could donate. She thought about Patricia, who was counting on this evening to be a success. She thought about herself, and the music that had been trapped inside her for 3 years, without asking permission. Without making an announcement, Maya sat down on the piano bench. The auction was still going on, but a few more people had noticed her. She could feel their eyes on her, wondering what the server was doing at the piano. She heard someone whisper, "What is she doing?" Maya placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar weight of them beneath her fingers. For just a moment, she was transported back to her music school days. When playing piano was as natural as breathing, she chose her opening piece carefully. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9, No. 2. It was a piece that started softly, intimately, drawing listeners in with its gentle melody before building to something more powerful. Maya pressed the first key, and the note rang out clear and pure in the restaurant. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The auctioneer's voice faltered. Heads turned toward the piano as if pulled by invisible strings. Maya played the opening phrase, her fingers remembering every nuance of the piece. The melody was simple but heartbreakingly beautiful, and it filled the restaurant with a warmth that had been missing all evening. She could feel the audience's attention shifting to her completely now. The auction had stopped, though the auctioneer was still holding his gavel, frozen in surprise. Patricia was standing near the kitchen door, her mouth open in shock. Maya continued playing, letting the music flow through her like water through a dam that had finally burst. The Nocturne was a piece about longing, about beauty found in darkness, about hope that persists even when everything seems lost. It was perfect for this moment. As the piece developed, Maya's confidence grew. Her posture straightened, her touch became more assured, and the music began to soar. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling a story, sharing emotions that had been locked away for 3 years. The restaurant had become completely silent except for the piano. 200 of the city's most important people were sitting in rapt attention, watching a server transform into something magical before their eyes. Maya finished the Nocturne and immediately transitioned into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most emotionally powerful pieces ever written. Without an orchestra, she had to carry both the melody and the accompaniment, but her fingers danced across the keys with the skill of someone who had spent years mastering the instrument. The Rachmaninoff was passion incarnate. It was about love and loss, triumph and tragedy, the full spectrum of human emotion distilled into music. Maya poured everything into it. Her frustration at being invisible, her sadness at abandoning her dreams, her anger at a world that had forced her to choose between art and survival, but most of all, she poured her hope into it. Hope that it wasn't too late. Hope that talent and beauty could still matter. Hope that this moment could change everything. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves, filling every corner of the restaurant. Maya's hands moved with lightning speed across the keys, executing passages that would challenge even professional concert pianists. This wasn't just good playing, this was virtuoso-level performance. She could see the faces in the audience now, and they were transformed. The bored expressions had been replaced by wonder, amazement, and something deeper. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others were leaning forward in their seats, as if trying to get closer to the music. Maya had become visible in a way she'd never been before. Not as a server, not as someone who brought food and cleared dishes, but as an artist. As someone who could create beauty that moved people's souls. The concerto built to its climactic finale, and Maya played with everything she had. Her fingers flew across the keys, her body swayed with the rhythm, and the music erupted from the piano like a volcano of sound and emotion. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was profound. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of a boring auction, but the reverent silence of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked out at the audience and saw something she'd never seen before in 3 years of serving them. She saw recognition. She saw respect. She saw people truly seeing her for the first time, and in that moment everything changed. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Maya sat at the piano, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. Her hands were still trembling from the intensity of the performance, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was the elderly gentleman who had been disappointed about the cancelled performance. He was standing at his table, tears streaming down his face, applauding with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for world-famous concert halls. Another person joined him, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. 200 wealthy guests were on their feet, clapping, cheering, and wiping away tears. The sound was overwhelming, echoing off the restaurant's high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Maya had never experienced anything like it, even in her music school days, performing for audiences of music lovers. She'd never felt this kind of raw, emotional response. These people weren't just appreciating her technical skill, they were thanking her for giving them something they didn't even know they needed. The applause continued for what felt like minutes. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky, and looked out at the crowd. She saw faces she recognized from magazines and news programs, all looking at her with genuine admiration and respect. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the back of the room. "Magnificent!" Patricia was standing near the kitchen door, her mouth still open in shock. She looked like she'd just witnessed a miracle, which in a way she had. The applause finally began to die down, but the energy in the room had completely transformed. Where there had been polite boredom, now there was electric excitement. The guests were buzzing with conversation, all of it focused on what they'd just witnessed. "Who is she?" Maya heard someone whisper loudly. "Where did she come from?" The auctioneer, who had been forgotten during Maya's performance, cleared his throat and approached the microphone. But before he could speak, the tech billionaire Maya had been serving all evening walked toward the piano. David Chen was known for his blunt speaking style and his ability to cut through nonsense. He'd built his fortune by recognizing talent and potential that others missed. Now he was looking at Maya with the same intensity he probably used to evaluate business investments. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the room without a microphone. "I think we all need to know who you are." Maya's throat felt dry. She looked around the room at all the expectant faces, then back at David Chen. "I'm Maya Rodriguez," she said quietly. "I'm your server." The room buzzed with murmurs of surprise and disbelief. "You're a server?" asked the famous actress, who had moved closer to the piano. "But you play like a professional, like someone who's been trained at the highest level." Maya nodded, her voice getting stronger. "I graduated from the Juilliard School of Music 3 years ago. I have a master's degree in piano performance." The silence that followed was different from the one after her performance. This was the silence of people trying to process something that didn't make sense to them. "But if you're trained at Juilliard," David Chen continued, "why are you working as a server?" Maya looked down at her hands, then back up at the crowd. For 3 years, she'd been invisible to these people. Now they were hanging on her every word. "Student loans," she said simply. "Family obligations. Medical bills." The same reasons a lot of talented people end up in jobs that don't match their dreams. The room was quiet again, but it was a thoughtful quiet. Many of these wealthy guests had probably never considered the financial realities that forced gifted people to abandon their passions. "What pieces did you just play?" asked the elderly gentleman who had started the applause. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Maya replied. "Without sheet music," observed the famous actress. "You played all of that from memory." "Most classical pieces are memorized," Maya explained. "When you've practiced something hundreds of times, it becomes part of you." David Chun was studying Maya with obvious fascination. "You said you graduated 3 years ago. Have you been playing professionally at all since then?" Maya shook her head. "I haven't performed publicly since my graduation recital. I can't afford to maintain a piano, and I work 6 days a week here." "That's criminal," said a woman Maya recognized as a prominent art collector. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted serving tables." "With respect," Maya replied, "there's nothing wrong with serving tables. It's honest work, and it pays my bills. But you're right that it's not what I dreamed of doing with my life." The crowd was murmuring again, but Maya could tell something was happening. These weren't just polite compliments from people who felt sorry for her. These were business people, influential people, people who were used to making things happen. "We need to talk," David Chun said firmly, "all of us, about what we can do to change this situation." What followed was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. The charity auction was temporarily forgotten as the room's most powerful people began an impromptu discussion about Maya's future. "My foundation funds arts education," said the art collector. "We could arrange for you to perform at our next gala. The exposure alone would be worth thousands." "I know the director of the City Symphony," added another guest. "They're always looking for talented soloists." "What about recording?" suggested someone else. "I have connections in the music industry." Maya listened in amazement as these strangers, people who had looked through her for 3 years, began planning her career. But it was David Chun who made the most concrete offer. "Here's what I'm thinking," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to call my assistant right now and have her set up a meeting with the director of our company's cultural foundation. We fund artists, especially those who've been overlooked by the traditional system." He paused and looked directly at Maya. "How much do you owe in student loans?" Maya hesitated. The number was embarrassing, a constant source of anxiety that kept her awake at night. "About $80,000, she said quietly. "Consider it paid," David Chun said without hesitation. "The Chun Foundation will cover your debt as an investment in your talent." The room erupted in applause again, but Maya felt dizzy. $80,000, gone, just like that. "But I can't accept that," she protested. "I don't even know you." "You just gave us a performance worth far more than $80,000, David Chun replied. "You reminded us why we love music, why we support the arts, why beauty matters. That's priceless." The famous actress stepped forward. "I'm producing a film next year that needs a classical soundtrack. Would you be interested in composing for it?" Maya's head was spinning. An hour ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was being offered opportunities she'd only dreamed about. "I don't understand," she said. "Why are you all doing this?" "Because talent like yours shouldn't be hidden," said the elderly gentleman. "Because we've all been where you are in different ways. Because sometimes the right moment comes along and you have to be brave enough to seize it." Patricia finally approached the group, still looking stunned. "Maya, I had no idea. All this time I had no idea." "I didn't want anyone to know," Maya replied. "I was embarrassed. I felt like a failure." "You're not a failure," David Chun said firmly. "You're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you needed to do to survive. But now it's time to do more than survive." The next few hours passed in a blur. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers were shared, and concrete plans were made. Maya found herself with a calendar full of meetings, auditions, and performance opportunities, but the most meaningful moment came when the charity auction resumed. The energy in the room had completely changed. Inspired by Maya's story and her courage, the guests bid with unprecedented generosity. The final total was 3 times what the foundation had raised the previous year. "You did that," Patricia told Maya as they watched the final bids come in. "Your music opened their hearts." As the evening wound down, Maya changed out of her server uniform for the last time. She looked at herself in the employee bathroom mirror and saw someone different. Not just because of the opportunities that had been offered to her, but because she had finally stopped hiding. She had taken the biggest risk of her life, and it had paid off in ways she never could have imagined. 6 months later, Maya walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall for her debut solo concert. In the audience were many of the same people who had been at the charity gala, but now they were there specifically to see her perform. As she sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the tiny apartment with the broken coffee machine to the stage of one of the world's most prestigious concert halls, she began to play, and the music filled the hall with the same power and beauty that had transformed that restaurant 6 months ago. But this time she wasn't surprising anyone. This time they had come to see Maya Rodriguez, the pianist, and she was finally completely visible.